Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 20th of Feb 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Nvidia releases more details on the forthcoming GTX Titan graphics card. Activision lays off 30 staff and scales back on licensed games. The head of Crytek claims that next-gen consoles cannot possibly match PCs. And Ubisoft announces they will sell other publishers' titles, including EA and Warner Brothers, in their Uplay store. Now, we've certainly heard rumors and little murmurings about the forthcoming Titan card, which is the next-generation graphics device from Nvidia. However, we didn't know specifics until yesterday. However, we now know the specs of this thing, as well as its price point, and a number of other interesting pieces of information. So the GeForce GTX Titan is going to, by the looks of it, be the most powerful single GPU card on the market, although it will be a little slower than the GeForce 690, which is the flagship dual GPU card, which is basically two 680s stuck together on one big, noisy, power-consuming device. And they're looking to launch this at around $1,000, so very much a high-end power user card, very much a premium device. We can go a little bit into the specs of it. It's got 2,688 CUDA cores, or stream processors as they're known. It's equipped with 6 gigabytes of 6 GHz GDDR5, so that is a lot of video RAM. It has a 384-bit memory bus width, as well as a core clock speed of 837 MHz, which is surprisingly lower than the existing offerings. The GTX 680 has 1006, with the 690 on about 915. Although, bear in mind, of course, the way architecture works, it's not all about megahertz anymore. In fact, it hasn't been for a long time. This thing also is looking to draw about 250 watts of total power, which is definitely less than the 690 does, although slightly more than the 680, which draws about 195 watts total. Long story short, it's pretty much a beast. The question is, however, where does this kind of fit into the marketplace? We're looking at a $1,000 card. This is the same as a 690. So if you wanted to buy just one card to put in your machine, then you'd probably think, well, a 690 is a better bet. And in some instances, you would be right. What essentially a 690 is two GPUs stuck together in SLI on one card. It's a big card, it's a noisy card, and of course it has very high power draw. So that thing is great if you're just looking for one card with all the performance you could possibly want. Absolutely wonderful card. Admittedly, it is a power-hungry little beastie. However, the problem with dual GPU cards is the inherent issues with SLI, the fact that SLI doesn't necessarily scale all that well, depending on what game you happen to be playing. Now, a few years ago, buying SLI was a pretty stupid idea, because SLI performance increases were definitely not linear. That means that you put two cards in a machine, you'd expect, oh, I get double the performance, right? No, not even close. Thankfully, games have got a lot better about using SLI lately, although there are plenty of games that still have problems with it, and your mileage may certainly vary. So, while you would be getting a slower card in the form of the Titan, you do have a single GPU card, which means that in reality, while it is a little bit slower, on a lot of games it's actually going to perform better because it is a single GPU card. You could also SLI the things. In fact, I'm very tempted to pick up two of these things around launch if possible, looking for an upgrade, mostly because my card's really, really loud. What this thing is supposed to allow for is a significantly quieter device, which to me is kind of a big deal. According to Anantech benchmarks, 3 of these things will hit about 48 decibels, whereas 3 680s hits more like about 52, 53, and the HD 7970 in a 3-way crossfire configuration, that's the AMD cards, they rocket up to about 62. Now, as you're probably well aware, decibels are logarithmic, which means that every 3 decibels you go up, that means you essentially make it double the volume. So that's significantly quieter. That's kind of a big deal. But the question still remains, does anyone want to buy this thing? Well, again, it is a very high-end card. The funny thing about it is that the Titan, which is something you probably heard of before, is actually part of a supercomputer. Much of these GPUs are used in the so-called Tesla machines. These are just massive supercomputers, and supposedly this card is going to be an entry-level card for doing lots of really, really complex calculations, something they are calling compute. This doesn't really have any gaming applications, but it's interesting to note, to say the least, that this is the kind of thing that researchers, developers, and engineers may very well be looking to try and pick one of these things up. As a gamer, it's the kind of thing that if you've got a lot of disposable income, you can buy one of these things and it'll be an absolute beast. I mean, it is still the most powerful single GPU card on the market, and I think there are a lot of benefits to that. The question, I suppose, is, do you want to drop $1,000 on each one? Well, when you buy a premium graphics card, something that high-end, you're essentially buying a sports car. You're not buying it because it scales well price performance-wise. There are many other options for that. Personally, I'm very interested in the idea that we'll be getting a card which is a lot quieter and yet is a hell of a lot more powerful and has a ton of overclocking potential. They've got a new boost feature in there called GPU Boost 2.0, which is temperature-based boosting rather than the voltage-based stuff of the previous cards, which hopefully means that these things will be able to be pushed a lot harder. And, well, I've got to say this, these cards run cooler, they're quieter, which is great for my office because it's terribly ventilated and loud, which is not what we want. So maybe I'll pick a few of these up. One way or the other, for PC gamers, it's good news because that means that we are starting to approach the next generation of graphics hardware, even though the only people that will really be experiencing it at the start are very much the enthusiasts and those with a little bit too much money to burn. Activision has announced that they are cutting 30 full-time staff from its global workforce. That's not exactly a huge number, but what it indicates is that they're looking perhaps to scale back on the development of licensed games. A couple of staff were also let go at Treyarch, and in a statement, Activision said, like any successful business, Activision Publishing consistently works to align its costs with its revenues, and that is an ongoing process. According to Activision, the cuts at Treyarch were to do with the fact that they had too many staff and that they were focusing on the development of DLC, which didn't need quite as many people there. One should also point out, according to Activision, that the amount of people they cut was 0.5%. So it's not like they are just slashing jobs left, right, and center. Now, what makes this interesting is that it follows up from the recent gutting of Eurocom. That was the development house behind a lot of the Bond games. There was a lot of speculation that Activision at this point is looking to scale back on licensed game development. They currently hold the licenses for Spider-Man, as well as Transformers, the James Bond franchise, and Cabela's Dangerous Hunts, and of course they're focusing on Walking Dead as well as Deadpool. There is very much the possibility that the studio will decide to cut James Bond games entirely from its roster. Recent releases have not exactly done particularly well, but it's probably due to the fact that they were dreadful. However, it should be, of course, noted that they had record sales in 2012. They did very, very well. They managed to pull in $4.86 billion, which is pretty crazy. It's up slightly from 2011, where they had $4.76 billion in revenue. They're doing pretty well for themselves, honestly. It's mostly due to Skylanders, I think, honestly, and Call of Duty probably isn't hurting them either. But one way or the other, Activision continues to trundle along with no problems whatsoever, whereas EA seems to be struggling. It's funny, really, considering that a couple of years ago, Activision were considered the big evil by most people, yet we seem to have refocused on EA, and they aren't doing so well, whereas Activision is having no issues whatsoever. But hey, there you go. Personally, I would not be too unhappy to see less licensed titles from Activision, and every now and again they actually come up with a good original IP, which of course they then milk for the next 5 years, but we'll take what we can get. Crytek studio head Kevat Yerli has stated in an interview with Eurogamer that he believes it is impossible for next-generation consoles to match the power of gaming PCs. He said, without breaking any NDAs that are in place, realistically, from purely a price point perspective, it is impossible. It is impossible to package $2,000 to $3,000 into a mainstream, let's say, $500 console. Given consumer pricing and given the cost of production of a gamer PC and the amount of watt of power it needs, which is like a fridge, it is impossible. He also went on to talk a little bit about Crysis 3 and the fact that Crysis 2 was not exactly much of an evolution on the original in terms of its graphical prowess. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He said that in the development of Crysis 3, this time around, the consoles couldn't really gain much more over Crysis 2. It was about 5 or 10%, but the PC version, because of the fact that PCs had essentially evolved over the course of 2 years, which is about 2 generations, they could leverage and use DirectX 11 to its full potential. So what they're claiming is, and you will get to see that in my video, and we'll see whether or not you believe it, is that Crysis 3 is a graphical beast in comparison to Crysis 2, more akin to the original Crysis on PC that was indeed melting PCs so long ago. The boss claimed, our graphics programmers said, we're gonna give them a game they can't run anymore. Yeah. And they're not wrong, by the way. You can check out my Crysis video. It may or may not be out by the time that you see this video, but it should be out, assuming nothing goes wrong, on the same day. One way or the other, yeah, Crysis 3 is a graphical beast, but the point that's being made here is something that lines up, I very much feel, with what's been going on over the last few months. We've heard rumor after rumor that these machines will not be absolutely beastly, that they will be focusing on different kinds of play instead. We've heard about touchscreens, we've heard about Kinect 2, we've heard about all sorts of different things, and we've heard about a lack of priority in pushing the boundaries when it comes to actual graphical prowess. We've heard that while 4K video playback might be possible, there's no way that you're going to be doing 4K gaming anytime soon. Indeed, 1080p at 60 frames per second might be something that these systems actually struggle with. So this is potentially good news and potentially terrible news for anyone that's a PC gamer. And this guy is absolutely on the money, by the way. There's no real question that you can't just turn around and say, yeah, for $500 we're going to make a console that's as powerful as your $3,000 machine. You can do some optimization because it's not a PC. It's different architecture. It's focused towards one specific task. There are certain things you can do there. And don't get me wrong, over the last 7 or 8 years, some miracles of optimization have been put into place to allow console games to keep going. Think about when the consoles came out, for God's sake. We're talking about machines that came out in 2005, 2006. That is old hardware, and yet we can still run modern games on it. That's kind of a wonderful thing. But if you think about the massive jump these machines are going to have to make to compete with, say, a PC with a hexa-core CPU in it, as well as something like a 680 or even, as you pointed out, SLI. I mean, you can go up to quad SLI, for God's sake, which is an absolutely absurd amount of power that you don't need, but you can do it. So the good thing is potentially that means PC gaming is going to rocket ahead. It's already ahead. What you can then do is you can optimize what we currently have. I mean, the top end, the 680 for instance, will run anything really well with the exception maybe of PlanetSide and Crysis 3. Those are like the 2 games that won't run at about 60 FPS at 1080p. So you can optimize based on the previous generation. You can put out the next generation of mid-range, more affordable cards that are as meaty as, say, a 680 is, but lower power requirements, less ridiculously loud coolers, and so on and so forth. And that means that you can bring in another tier of gamers into this really high-def, fast, smooth gaming experience, and that allows PC gaming to flourish. It also means, of course, that we can push graphics even further with new engines or with new technology coming out, such as the Titan and the forthcoming stuff from AMD and everything else that comes the next generation of Nvidia and AMD cards. Unfortunately, the flip side of it is it also means we could be in a really horrible spot whereby consoles once again hold back the PC market. I feel that the last year has been particularly good to us in this regard. We've got more and more good PC ports, more and more games whereby they're coming across as having actually spent a bit of time with the PC version, making the PC version the flagship game once again, not holding the PC version back as a result of the console version. But the year before that, I mean, it was awful. We've had a couple of years of really bad ports. We still get them every now and again. Stuff like Darksiders is a prime example of that. That was a dreadful port. really, really bad texture resolution. Stuff like Prototype 2, also a complete mess, didn't run very well, not well optimized. But we are getting past that point. But there was a couple of years where things were really, really grim. If they did come to PC, the version sucked, and they didn't take full advantage of the power that we had at our disposal. So the question is, what happens there? I'm going to make a prediction here, and I'm going to say that 2013 to probably the middle of 2014, we're going to see a period of PC dominance, and I'm going to say that because I feel the adoption rates for the new machines, the PS4 and the 720 or whatever they call them, will be slower than you might expect, and I'm basing that on the Wii U, and I'm also basing that on a lot of dominance in terms of the amount of people that are just playing games on mobile devices rather than going for these big AAA experiences, whether people will actually be willing to drop a lot of money on a new console sight unseen. And I think that as a result, since you have the slower adoption rate, you end up seeing a much, much larger difference between the PC version of a game and the old console version of a game, because they're going to continue to drag this out on those old machines because there's such a big installed user base. I could be completely wrong, but I certainly hope that I'm not. And finally, Ubisoft has announced that they will be selling their competitors' products in the Uplay store with titles from publishers such as EA, Warner Brothers, and more besides. Currently, they're looking to have about 15 partners, which include EA, Warner Brothers, 1C, Freebird Games, Iceberg Interactive, Nordic, Paradox, Recoil, Robot Entertainment, Telltale, and Torn Banner, aka the Chivalry Dudes. So they're going to be selling this on the Uplay store, and this also means that Ubisoft titles are going to start popping up on Origin, which is EA's store. This is... God, dogs living with cats? This is, I don't know, this is madness, man. But whatever the case, the argument that Ubisoft made was that they think that choice and more digital options are good for the whole industry, and no doubt it looks like alliances are being made in order to try and compete with the monolith, the Titan, the Colossus, that is, of course, Valve's Steam platform. Now, Ubisoft claims that Uplay currently has 50 million users, which is a lot, of course, and you might think, wow, that's insane, that's an absolutely huge amount, that's great for the store. Well, not really, because Uplay is something that you can't really avoid using, and if I'm totally honest, I don't think I've ever used the Uplay store for anything, so this is not something that I personally would be interested in trying out. Unless, of course, they had some absolutely wonderful deals. But I think it's a little disingenuous to say, yeah, there's 50 million users on Uplay. It's like, well, what it just means is that a bunch of people are playing games that require you to connect to Uplay, and that includes a lot of mobile users as well for a lot of the Ubisoft games on iOS and Android. What this definitely shows from Ubisoft, and of course that follows in the footsteps of EA, Valve, and a number of other different companies, is that they are wanting to start to move towards digital distribution, and you can hardly blame them. I'm sure they would love to be able to get the retailers out of the way if the market was right for that, considering the amount of pressure that retailers are currently able to put on publishers. And we will see where this goes. They believe that in 4 to 5 years, digital will constitute about 50% of the Ubisoft business. So I'm intrigued to see where this goes. It's one way or the other. I'm just going to say this. More competition is a good thing. You can love Steam all you damn well please, and there's so many good things to say about Valve and Steam, but competition is a good thing. What this could, of course, mean is that Ubisoft decides to move its titles off of Steam, though, and that's going to cause yet more fracturing that we're already getting because EA refuses to sell its AAAs on Steam. We could have Ubisoft move stuff like the Far Cry series, the Assassin's Creed series off of Steam and start to sell it exclusively on Uplay or on Origin. What's interesting, actually, is that if you look at the way that Origin's currently doing things, you can buy Origin games at pretty much every store that isn't Steam. You can get them on Gamersgate, you can get them on Gamefly, you can get them all over the place, but you can't get them on Steam. And I'm interested to see whether or not Ubisoft takes that step. I'm kind of hoping that they don't. I feel that the only real way to properly build your business is to provide better service than the other guy. And don't get me wrong, this is exactly what Steam did. I mean, Valve games are only available on Steam. So it's not like Valve didn't do this, and Valve is continuing to do this with stuff like Dota 2, saying, oh look, here's this amazing free game that's completely free with a business model and act that no one can actually legitimately follow. and you're going to have to use Steam for it. They have, for the last few years, been pushing Steam hard via that software that's coming out of their studios. So it's funny that people are okay with that, but they're not okay with EA and with Ubisoft doing this. But it just seems overall that every time a company does this, it's just bad for the consumer. It means you've got to go to a specific place to run it. It's another program you need. It's another form of DRM that you need. And nobody wins in this regard. And I hope that that does not happen. Okay, folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Content Patch, and I will see you next time.